Hey, this is Remy Franklin. I'm reporting back on September 14th at the end of a rainy day here in Lander, Wyoming. And I had another training session this morning with climbing coach Steve Bechtel, and today we talked about short strength endurance or short power endurance. And this was a new concept for me, but it's basically about how we train that period of exercise from like 15 to 30 seconds from when we start doing hard moves on a route or a boulder problem. And I think we've all sort of felt that sometimes when you're on a hard boulder or on a crux, after about 10 seconds, you start to lose power. And I've started to understand energy systems a little better. I still have a long ways to go. But one of the things I found really interesting is apparently after about 10 seconds, our body starts to metabolize energy differently. And I've been reading about this in a few different places. I just picked up a recent, the latest copy of Eric Horst's book, and he really goes through these energy systems and the physiology of like metabolizing ATP and all of that in a huge amount of detail. So I encourage you to check that out. But here's a little clip of Steve talking about why that is that we lose power after about 10 seconds of doing hard moves when climbing, and then how we can train that space after 10 seconds to 30 seconds.
Explosiveness and strength both take place down in that lowest energy system. And so those are going to be less than 10 seconds. And so you go in here and we do a boulder problem, it's like 15, right? And so we start to call that long power or short power endurance. So those are about the same thing. Gotcha. And so when we look at this, then we'll call it short strength endurance. And so this stuff is in the realm of 15 to 30 second efforts. I'm just trying to develop your ability to display power when we get more into that lactic energy system. And so when you do super hard boulder problem, and we're down to this less than 10 seconds, we're using that really high powered energy system. We move to the lactic energy system, a little bit more endurance, a little bit less power. Like if you get just the capability of moving your explosiveness, rightward on that lactic curve, things really open up. Because if you can perform at any level of difficulty for that duration, we can just increase the duration of those too.
Yeah. So we talked about a couple of types of exercises that would be useful for training short strength endurance. We didn't actually go through them today because they're pretty straightforward. Basically fall into two categories. So the first one is basically doing boulder problems, but then adding a little bit of climbing in advance. And so that can look like a few things. You can just start on a jug rest, like on a hold, shake out for 10 seconds, and then do the hard boulder problem. You could traverse in to do a hard boulder problem. Can do linked problems where you do an easy problem first and then a hard boulder problem. And so all of those are methods. I think a lot of us have done that before. If you want to make things a little bit harder, traverse in, then do the hard boulder problem. The other basic option for exercises for training short strength endurance is adding weightlifting before the boulder problem. And so that seems like a cool way to kind of combine some of the strength work or developing power with weights, and then going ahead and adding bouldering in with it. And so that could look like doing a deadlift set and then say hanging straight leg raises, and then going to do a boulder problem and then resting and repeating that process. So those were two sort of general methods we talked about. I think they're pretty familiar to most of us. But I think what's really key is what Steve was talking about sort of energy systems, and starting to understand that has made a big difference for me in thinking about how I train myself for my climbing goals. The other thing I took away from our discussion about short strength endurance training was sort of more of a reminder, but I think a really important one, which is that strength and power are really our foundation, and endurance, as Steve likes to say, is just sort of the icing on the cake. And so certainly for me and progressing in my climbing, really what I need to focus on is training power and strength, and the endurance is going to come as I'm projecting routes or climbing a lot outside. So I think even with something like short strength endurance, that'll be a pretty minimal part of my training plan, at least this coming year, because I'll be focusing most of my time on pure strength and power training. So hopefully that was interesting, maybe a new concept for you. If so, I encourage you to do some reading about it and check it out, and especially about these energy systems and the metabolic pathways that allow us to pull really hard for the short amount of times, but not for a little bit longer. I'll be finishing up a few sessions with Steve. We also got into a little bit about program design today, which I think is going to be really cool, and I'll share a little bit more about that as we develop things and get a full training plan written out. Thanks for checking in.